Well, let's take the conversation forward. Then I'm joined by Dawie Scholtz. He is an independent election analyst, and he has been crunching the numbers furiously for the last 2 days, has Dawie. So he joins us now to unpack it all. So Dawie, the big takeout, we are told that the ANC retained 64 seats, lost 2, and won 6 new seats. That's nationally. And the DA retained 14, lost 9, and won 2 new seats. What do these figures tell you?
So I always think that it's very useful to look a little bit under those figures, right? So those are the high-level figures. But if you want to extrapolate and say, well, you know, if we were to have a national election tomorrow, what do we think will happen based on this really big sample that we got yesterday? It's useful to look at the voting kind of patterns and trends under there. And I see a few patterns that I think are very useful to note. So for the ANC and the EFF, it seems to me to be a relatively stable trend based on what we saw in 2016 and 2019, kind of almost a replication of those numbers. And I think, you know, what you said about the ANC sort of maintaining all of the wards they had, maybe dropping one here or there, gaining one here or there, that's in line with, I think, what we see at the more kind of voting station level data, that the ANC support seems to be quite stable, which is also interesting to reflect on, given that we've had quite an eventful year politically and economically, and you know, the ANC support base seems intact and stable, and the same for the EFF. The really interesting outcome out of this set of by-elections is definitely what's happening to the DA support. And I think there are very interesting trends to note. So the first one is that the DA lost a significant chunk of support from coloured voters yesterday all over the country. So in the Western Cape, they contested 10 wards. I think they were down double digits and more, you know, in 8 of those 10 wards, kind of between, I'd say, 15 and 30% in all of those wards they lost, and focused particularly heavily in coloured areas. Same in the Northern Cape, and also I think particularly emphasised the same in Southern Joburg, in Lenasia, Riverlea, traditional strong DA areas, where they lost between 15 and 30% of the support of, I think, mostly coloured and Indian voters, which is, I think, a really significant trend and potentially dangerous for them, right? That's the one thing. The other thing, I think, is also with white Afrikaans voters. So this is a smaller sample. We did not get so many areas that fall into that demographic category, but there was one area contested in Potchefstroom, Ward 5, that's JB Marks, in Northwest Province, between the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. I mean, this is like a traditional DA ward, which DA won by 78% in 2016. I think they got 28% of the vote in that ward, and the Freedom Front Plus actually won the ward off the DA.
Yeah.
So this trend we saw of Afrikaans voters going away from the DA to the Freedom Front Plus doesn't seem to have reversed yet. And then the final one as well is with kind of black voters out, like, right? We didn't see a lot of examples of the DA contesting wards with the ANC and the EFF in predominantly black areas. But there was one municipality, Polokwane, in the Northern Cape, where they did do that. And in the 10 wards contested there, the DA lost about half of the black vote. So they had about 6 or 7% going into yesterday, and they came out with 2 or 3%.
Yeah.
So I think those 3 trends all spell significant challenges for the.
So Dawie, you've been quite unpopular on Twitter, I saw, after you've been tweeting your analysis and basically giving a breakdown, particularly on the performance of the DA. I saw you describing it as a total DA disaster, and went on to say, if you want a party that can challenge the ANC to actually fix South Africa, the current iteration of the DA isn't going to get you there. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the numbers make it quite clear, right? If we have a national election tomorrow or next year or the year thereafter, I think it's very highly unlikely that the DA is going to see significant growth, given these results and given the erosion of the party's brand equity in recent years. And you know, and we also know that there's a group of voters out there who are really looking for alternatives to the ANC, and who are considering who to vote for, right? And those voters want an alternative that can actually challenge and that can change things. And I think there are serious questions being raised now about whether the DA actually has the brand and the vision and the plan to achieve that and to effectively challenge, because these results don't seem to suggest it. And the trajectory that the party's on, it doesn't seem to suggest that it will change anytime soon. I mean, there's some time between now and next year's election, so let's wait and see. But at least based on these latest numbers, the DA brand may not be the most optimal way to, try to challenge the ANC for those votes.
I've seen some social media commentary seeking to suggest that the EFF underperformed. But I do see that they actually picked up a number of seats, including in the Northern Cape, in those municipalities that had been disbanded altogether, and an entire new council had to be constituted where they previously didn't have any seats. But your own sense is that, far from underperforming, it's basically stable performance by the EFF.
Yeah, look, I think we need to delve into those numbers a little bit more deeply. But my first view is that it seems to be quite stable. And again, if you are talking about hundreds of thousands of voters across, 90 wards or whatever the number was, then you will be up in some places, down in other places, but roughly stable, I think is what we're seeing for the EFF.
Lastly, Dawie, what's the story with independence? What do the numbers tell you about independence? It's always fascinating, isn't it? Especially in the local government elections, the role played by independents, people who previously belonged to a political party, because of one reason or another, decide they're going to go it alone and stand as independents. What did you see?
So unless I'm mistaken, I don't think any independents won wards last night, but independents did make significant dents in some places. So I think one should interpret that in two ways, right? So the one, I think, important interpretation is not to take an independent affected election result and try to project it onto the rest of the country. However, there are some things one can learn from it. And I think there was one particular ward which I found very interesting, which was Knysna Ward 9, which reported early last night, which is like a deep, deep blue DA ward, right, which the DA usually wins by 90% plus. And the former DA mayor, which I think had been suspended by the party, challenged in that ward, and I think won about a third of the vote, 27% or so of the vote, which is, I think, a really interesting indicator that these local dynamics can have an impact on the result, obviously, but also can sometimes act as a proxy for protest votes or for general disagreement with the party when voters don't necessarily have a strong alternative, or if there's not a strong other party on the ballot, then sometimes these independents act as a sort of place for protest votes to land, which I think has happened to some extent in the vote yesterday.
Just so that I don't miss this, just in case anything shifted, in Johannesburg, nothing shifted, right? Where the ANC leads, a coalition government with just a majority of one. Nothing moved, did it?
So things did move in Johannesburg. So the DA lost 3 wards in Johannesburg. So there were kind of 4 wards contested in the southern part of Johannesburg, which is predominantly kind of coloured and Indian voters around Lenasia. And the DA lost 3 of those wards, 1 to the Patriotic Alliance, 1 to the ANC, and 1 to Al-Jama'ah. So I think I'm not exactly sure what the arrangements are in the coalition, but I think my understanding is that actually further strengthens the ANC's position and weakens the DA's position in the city of Johannesburg.
Yeah, without a doubt, it would have that effect, given just how precarious the balance has been in the city council in Joburg. To lose 3 wards doesn't bode well at all for the DA in terms of prospects of reclaiming Johannesburg. All right, thank you for your insights there. Dawie Scholtz, an independent analyst who's been crunching the numbers in as far as the performance of the political parties in yesterday's by-elections is concerned.